just fine. According to this bar here, it seems like everything's okay. Like I was trying to say before, I've been having all kinds of technical problems today ever since I activated a few things. Moderators, please let me know if you can hear me now clearly. Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna continue thinking this is just fine. All right, what were we doing last week? Well, last week we were looking at a new project. We were trying out Unreal 5. So that was a little bit of uncharted waters. Um, so I'm going to continue with the uncharted waters. Uh, so yeah, so let's get started. I'm going to run Unreal. I got the little icon that snuck in there. Okie dokie. Okay, so these are all the projects. Hang on a second. Space Chuck's editor. That would be easier. Just go to the Space Chuck's project, and we'll have our we'll get started there. Okay, so last week we covered a few things. We talked about starting a new project, and here we have a brand new project and the default Unreal settings. And I'm going to get my controller out, my Xbox controller. Always good to test it out with this and the mouse whenever possible. I generally use this as much as possible so I can save my wrist. I've had some serious issues with carpal tunnel in the past. All right, so if I run this, yeah, and click in here, I will have the default Unreal thing. Now we don't have the little ball that was floating here because this is a whole new project. So yeah, well, it was good for the little test that we did last week. All right, so by default, if you do a third-person project with Unreal, like there's nothing you can't do here. Like I'm just downloading Unreal, creating a new project, and starting a third-person project, and you should be able to do what I'm doing right now with no problems. And the character that comes with the third-person project should look like this, and you should have basic controls. You should be able to walk and run and jump and all that stuff. Okay, so now we're gonna I'm gonna start going into some of the details on how you can go from this to your own your own map and start doing some of your own work. Okay, so the first thing that we're probably going to want to do is, well, we're probably going to want to get rid of some of this stuff here. So let's just get rid of this. And if you're seeing these things, it's just because I have the project set to bake lights, which is like this process that well, I'll do it right now. So now that I've made changes, what you'll notice is if you try to play, it should tell you that there's, well, actually, because we deleted it and didn't just modify it, it did that. So let's see. Let me just content. Can I? They changed this. They put this over here. So let's say I bring in the sphere and I move this over here. If I press play, it'll tell you lighting needs to be rebuilt. There's been a change, and every time that you do a change like this, in order to be more efficient later when you're playing the game, you want to bake the lights, meaning you pre-calculate the shadows. You don't want to have the shadows calculating all the time. That is a good way to burn someone's video card if you're calculating heavy amounts of shadows. And you'd be surprised how many game development companies make that mistake. There's a lot of people who just don't pay attention to this kind of stuff and end up making a game that looks wonderful, but then it's a joke as to the optimization. And I've seen some companies like that. They just didn't care about it. So what we're going to do here, they've changed it. So if you're not in Unreal 5 and you're in Unreal 4, they had a whole bunch of icons here at the top. Now it's over here, and there's a shortcut. You can always use the Control-Shift-semicolon button. I'll do it like this first, just to show where the button is, and then we'll do Control-Shift-semicolon later. So it's basically calculating based on the objects that are here and the lights that are in the scene. It's calculating what the shadows would be. So now that light, for example, that's right there on the ground, that is pre-calculated now. And it doesn't have to need to calculate it on the fly like it does with the character. The character is a different kind of object, and because it is a dynamic object that's moving based on our controls, it will cast the shadow based on that, based on where you're standing, and it should play nicely with any shadow that has also been pre-calculated. As you can see, there's no overlapping shadows like double shadows. It's just one shadow, and it's like a single like if you're looking at the character here, you'll notice that it's all one blob, and it makes sense. It looks good. So yeah, so we're like the first thing that I do normally is pretty much start removing things I don't need. For example, in this project, in this scene, even that sky, it's a nice skybox, and it's constantly updating as you're moving around. Like basically, as you're working, it's just constantly just moving, and the clouds are shifting. It's nice, and with a few adjustments, you can make it so it's a little bit more lightweight. But even that thing's kind of not exactly optimal. You have to tweak it a little bit to get it to be a little bit more optimal. It's got a lot of big images. I'm always talking about optimization. You may have noticed. The reason why is if you don't think about these things, it will bite you in the butt. Right now, I'm actually currently doing some work for another company just to help them out, and they don't seem to be too focused on this. And hopefully, it'll be okay. But in my experience, you need to be thinking about optimization from day one, and it's not just for current gen, or even if you're thinking about Switch. Like if you want to do Switch, you have to have levers ready to go. You have to be pulling the levers and have levers in place to pull in order to optimize for the Switch and have a plan. So that's one thing that I really recommend highly is always be thinking about optimization. I understand there's an artistic process and you want to be free and make great things, but it really hurts you later as an artist when you have to delete everything you've made because it simply won't run on the right console. You're making a game, not a fancy movie. So you have to think about optimization. For real. I'm very serious. It's like, don't put in anything that's just going to eat up all of your resources. You're just going to it's just going to be painful later to remove it. I remember I was on the Mass Effect 3, one of the DLCs. It was called Omega. And of course I was brought in to do some of the, let's say, rather bizarre kinds of special effects that we needed. So I created a whole bunch of things. And then we had to submit to Microsoft, and it wasn't running at the right frame rate and stuff like that. Anyways, point is, we ended up having to delete a lot of stuff and compress a lot of things, and it was unfortunate that we lost a lot of neat little things that we just built. Like we just finished building something, and then people were like, "Yeah, so now we have a bit of a problem." Go figure. Anyways, so optimization and thinking about how you build stuff is critical, even in the early stages here. Like for example, if you're adding, let's see, I'm just going to add a sphere. The thing that you should be thinking about is, okay, remember I talked about these objects, the ones with what we call a transform, meaning it can be moved anywhere in the world. We call these actors, and there's a count of this. So let's say you want to create something that has, even though the sphere might be not a big deal, it's just a couple polygons, but it counts as an actor, and you should have, as a rule of thumb, the 2000 count. You shouldn't have more than 2000 actors at any given time visible, or having your CPU trying to figure out where they are. And I know I'm kind of going roundabout before we get started here, but this is important. Like you need to understand like the mindset of what you're building before you build it. If you make a scene where you're pressing Alt and you're just doing this, and you end up with like 2,000 of these in your background, you're shooting yourself in your foot. So maybe for what you can do is once you finish placing your 2,000 spheres, you can combine them all together into a single sphere or into a single object, and that's 99 healing potions. By the way, shout out to 99 healing potions. He's been helping us out finding all kinds of interesting bugs. Some of them no one else has ever found, but he's capable of finding them in the. It's crazy how this guy finds all kinds of bugs. So thanks, man. I really appreciate everything that you've been doing and finding all the bugs for Spaceboat. And then as I go, I try to solve the problems that you find. But yeah, it's been thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. It was awesome. One of the best QAs I've ever met. It's great. I know you're yeah. It's like thanks a lot. Seriously. So actually we were talking about optimization and how you can really kill your frame rate. So that could be interesting for you. Alfred or Eigentourist, I should say. I have to be careful with the names I just did. Yeah, actually, here's the thing. Is it independent? What Eigentourist just asked. It's good to see you again. Well, I'll see you in the chat, anyways. The question he's just asked is 2,000 actors something that's independent of target or platform? And to some extent, yes. But at the end of the day, this is something that the actor count goes onto the CPU. So no matter what kind of a beast GPU you might have, it's not going to help with the actor count. So the CPU, there's kind of like these, we call them threads. So obviously you know more about threads than I do, but when we're talking about game threads and there's a couple of threads. There's some for like the game thread is an important one, and it's very CPU bound. And if you ever have any of your threads bottlenecking, your frame rate can drop to nothing. So as far as CPUs go, even if they're simple actors, even with a good CPU, because you've got so much stuff going on with each actor, because you have to consider an actor, there's this kind of like back and forth between the CPU and the GPU, where each actor is going to be checked to see if it's in view. It's going to have to know where all the vertices are to know what its bounding box is and know if it has to draw it or not. And there's all this stuff that's always going on for optimization's sake to make sure that you're not drawing things that are useless. So no matter what kind of CPU or any console that you have, there's generally this can bottleneck very quickly. And the 2000 rule has kind of been a pretty good constant even with the new consoles. Like generally, I wouldn't go over 2000 because even if you have a newer console, there's other overheads that are kicking in there now that we're in a new generation. That's added onto the calculation. So there's always something more that gets added. So generally, 2000 is good for just about every. You don't want to go over 2000. If you are going over 2000 actors, you better hope that there's some sort of optimization that's going on that's combining them or something. But generally, when you have free objects like the spheres here, I know they're just spheres, but too many actors can really slow things down. I remember I was working with a couple of guys that wanted it to work on wanted their game to work on PlayStation 4, and they had something like 6,000 actors, and even on PC, they were like, "Oh, there's these little hiccups," and I was like, "Yeah, we're well over the 2,000 limit. That's why you're getting these hiccups," and there was some issues that were starting to pop up because of it. So yeah, generally I find 2000 is, no matter what generation it is, 2000 actors always comes with a cost for calculation. So I generally try to figure out ways of combining things together so that they're not individual. Yeah, you have to, generally it's a little bit of it's a process, right? When you start seeing problems and it's because you have I remember one time we were like, oh, okay, so what we need to do is we've got too many of these objects to calculate for visibility. So what we're going to do is we're going to create these new objects that are kind of like these the visibility boxes, and it just says, okay, if this visibility box is out of view, take all of these objects that are in this like room type of thing and make them disappear. And then it got to the point where even the visibility boxes got so numerous that it had to calculate them before it would calculate the objects inside of it, and that was still a problem. But that's PS3 era, so that's maybe it has something to do with that. So for those that can't see the chat, Eigenturst is asking, I don't expect to go over 100 actors with my current mobile project or with any other ones I'm thinking of afterwards, but I had to ask. Yeah, for mobile, actually, the actual processors on the it's funny because mobile has got some pretty beefy CPU going on in there. It's just the GPUs, like I mean, considering the resolutions that are on those things, it's ridiculous. There's a reason why the Switch is basically a mobile GPU, and it's actually benefiting from the fact that the screen is only 720. Most people don't give their phones much credit, but when it comes to actor counts on a mobile device, I would be very careful. Yes, even though they're still beefy on some levels, that it's like the resolution. You can't control um, what phone people have. So for the sake of being safe, I would aim for a medium low, like the low to medium spec. And 100 actors is very reasonable. You should be fine. Like I would even go further than that, no problem. I wouldn't worry too much about actors. After like for mobile, just being safe, even if 1,000, you should be okay. You should be just fine. Okay, so alrighty. Well, again, it depends on the phone that you're aiming for. Yeah, like that's why it's always this kind of like juggling act. You're like, I want to be able to make it so that it works on the majority of things. Generally, the rule of thumb is where are the sales of units. So right now, the ones that are out there, like PS2, there's a lot of them out there still. But for the most part, I think the PS4 is still the one that's kicking butt the most as far as sales go. So I'm sure for the phones, it's a similar kind of concept. Like aim for the one that's the most common, and then try to make it so that you have like a give and take between a couple of phones between that and let's say a little bit less and a little bit more, and then that's basically where your average should be. On yeah, you want to get your game to work on a 6S, like an iPhone 6S Plus. Stretching things a bit. Actually, it's a 2015 phone. Well, here's the funny thing: a Switch, the GPU on a Switch is a Tegra, an NVIDIA Tegra. That's I think it's something like it's like a really old chip. It's like 10 years old, and it's a mobile phone. It's a phone chip. So it's you'd be surprised that people are able to squeeze a lot out of that thing. But it's there's always a way. If there's a will, there's a way. Absolutely. Seriously, if there's anybody that's worked on the Switch here on the chat, absolutely, hats off to you. Seriously, that is any Switch development is I think the hardest thing to do, simply because of the fact that you have even two different modes, either you're docked or undocked. Just that alone is a pain in the butt. But also to make things work on a Tegra, it's not like the original design where it was supposed to be. When it's docked, it had a different GPU. That's the idea that we all had, but of course, that was misleading. It was just help. We wanted it to be like that, but anyways. All right, so I'll move on. All right, so we have our scene, and so far we've just added these spheres. Not really all that exciting. So let's. What Unreal is really good at is it understand the people at Epic understand the process of making games really well. And just recently, I noticed in the starter content, they had props, and there's a couple of new props and things that they added for architecture as well, that I found was really funny because they even have the dimensions the way we used to have it at IDOS. And at IDOS, when we were working on the let's say I was on Thief 4, the newer Thief, the reboot of Thief. We were making things based on the Assassin's Creed tech. Frankly, basically IDOS had stolen all the people from Ubisoft that worked on Assassin's Creed and a whole bunch of other projects that were kind of similar nature, like a little bit open world or at least sandbox-ish. And so I noticed that out of the box, you now in architecture, you will find things that are almost to the dimensions that we used to use that are from from Ubisoft and from IDOS. We used to make these objects basically 4 meters by 4 meters, and we would just in this case we don't have a lot of snapping tools other than like snapping on the grid. But if you're looking up here on the screen, you'll see, and this is kind of important, like when you're building stuff, try not to make everything unique. So here's going to be a low blow kind of thing, and in a way they kind of deserve it, frankly. If you look at Destiny is designed as unique pieces. Everything is unique. There's very little that they build that is meant to be modular and broken down into pieces so that you can make more things. To the point where in Destiny 2, they kind of painted themselves into a corner, because at one point they were like, hey, we've got all this unique geometry and the file size is getting kind of big and people are complaining. So what did they do to add more stuff, more content, more DLC and more stuff? They deleted old stuff. Half the game disappeared. I'm not joking. They deleted half the game. So this is how important, thinking about this stuff is from the beginning. Because they didn't do anything in a modular sense, like what the guys from that I worked with at that were from Ubisoft and all that stuff. These guys had it down, had it down to a science. Basically, what they would do is they would build everything out of these pieces that were 4 by 4 meters, and everything would snap together. And then what they would do is, in order to reduce actor count, what they would do is they'd call it an atlas. Basically, all of the pieces that you would build, that you would use to make this, would then be turned into one piece, very low res, and it would almost look very similar at a certain distance. And what you would do is, when you're traveling through the map, you're basically making the many little actors and the single piece actor switch on and off depending on what distance you're at.